Nancy Wyman, State Democratic Chairwoman.
Nancy, thanks so much for being here.
And with us today is Nancy Wyman.
This is the Donkey Talk Podcast with your host, Connecticut Democratic Party Chairwoman Nancy Wyman.
Well, welcome everybody. Today I am extra specially excited to have our Democratic National Committee Chairman, Tom Perez, with us. And he's in Washington and I'm in Hartford, and we're still making this work. It's amazing what technology can do right now. I just want to tell you a little bit about our National Party Chair. He was a former federal prosecutor for the civil rights. Under the President Obama, served as Assistant Attorney General for Civil Rights and then Secretary of Labor. And now, since January of 2017, he's our fearless leader. So, Tom, I just wanted to ask you, what was your favorite job?
You know, I'm one of those people who has felt very lucky because I've loved every job I've ever had because they were the right job for the moment. I served in local government, served in state government. I worked for Senator Kennedy on the Hill back in the 90s. I had the privilege of working for President Clinton as a political appointee in the Justice Department, and then coming back under President Obama to lead the Civil Rights Division, and then to serve as the nation's labor secretary. And each job I had, Nancy, was the perfect job at the moment in time. When I was running for local office, that was when George W. Bush was in office, and quite frankly, I had no interest in working in D.C. at that point.
I can understand.
For obvious reasons. Although it's a weird world we live in when people wax nostalgic for George W. Bush.
That's for sure.
That just sort of tells you where we are right now in our broken democracy under this incredibly dangerous president. But for me, what's the common denominator of all these jobs that I've had the privilege of doing throughout my career of service is helping people, and helping people at scale. In the case of the Labor Department and the Civil Rights Division, I remember vividly a trip I took with the president to Connecticut, and we did an event around the minimum wage with Governor Malloy, Governor Patrick, Governor Shumlin of Vermont, and I think maybe the governor of Rhode Island was there as well. And it was a joint effort to highlight the need to lift wages, and Governor Malloy and you were able to accomplish that. And that's what it's all about, helping people at scale. And when we elect Democrats, we help people at scale. And when we lose elections at scale, then the people we care about get hurt at scale. And that's the moment in time we're living in. And that's why you and I are doing our jobs, because we want to elect Democrats so that we can get back to the business of building an America that really works for everyone, and having leaders who are looking out for other people and not themselves, like
Absolutely.
This reckless president.
Absolutely. And getting back to the president, there's a new Fox poll that shows a majority of Americans support not just impeachment, but removing President Trump from his office. You know, you've been living through this every day. Do you want to just talk about how we got to this point and what this man has been doing, in my opinion, to ruin our country?
Well, this is truly a moral fork in the road. And what got us here was a president who doesn't respect the rule of law. The Ukraine incident is a very straightforward incident. It is an abuse. It's a classic abuse of power case. Back in 2014, the Russians invaded Ukraine. They killed people indiscriminately. They took some of the territory of Ukraine. The global community came together. Republicans and Democrats came together and said, that is wrong, that is illegal, that is a violation of international rights and international law and international norms. And again, Republicans and Democrats came together around a package of aid, around a package of sanctions against Russia, and that bipartisan consensus continued. There was never any, we're going to give you this aid, but you got to do me a favor from Barack Obama or Joe Biden or anyone involved in the administration. This was a united front of Republicans and Democrats across our administration and in the global community. Then you fast forward to this president, whose North Star, every day he thinks about his North Star by looking in the mirror, because his North Star is himself. And as I think your listeners are beginning to learn, he did something just breathtaking in its shamefulness, to say the least, which is he said, you want this aid, you need to do me a favor. And you know what that favor was? They wanted to dig up dirt. And there is no dirt to dig up on the vice president. And that is wrong. And the reason why I think this impeachment has become such a, the polling has shifted so much, Madam Chair, is because people see this for the abuse of power that it is. This is an administration that said you can't prosecute a sitting president for criminal activity in office because the remedy for that is impeachment. And now this is a president who says you can't investigate me for potentially impeachable conduct, and he is giving the stiff arm to the House investigative committees. That is a president who doesn't understand what democracy is and doesn't understand what checks and balances is. And the reason why this is so important for us to do is because this is really about the essence of our democracy. Nobody is above the law. And I applaud what is happening. And I'll give you one more observation. I was a prosecutor at the Department of Justice for a number of years. I prosecuted a lot of police misconduct cases. My first federal trial was in the Southern District of Ohio in Cincinnati, and it involved a police officer who had done a lot of bad things. And while we were investigating him, his boss, the chief, who also happened to be his father-in-law, told all of the officers in the department, if you cooperate with the investigation, I'm going to fire you. So I ended up having not one defendant at trial, but I ended up having two defendants at trial. And the police officer was being prosecuted for the underlying civil rights violations, and his father-in-law, the police chief, was prosecuted for obstruction of justice. The criminal justice system can be used to bring people to justice in that context, private citizens, elected officials. And the impeachment process, similarly, is the process we use when presidents are stonewalling and when they've committed acts that are absolutely beneath the dignity of the office and put our national security at risk. And that is why it's so important for us to do this. And you may have some listeners who are wondering, well, is this politically dicey? With all due respect, and I totally get that question, and I get asked it a lot. This isn't about politics. And by the way, this isn't about right versus left. This is about right versus wrong. And when you have your democracy on the ballot like we have right now, and when you have a president who's saying, I am above the law, you can't prosecute me and you can't investigate me. Nobody is above the law. And what the conduct in Ukraine illustrates to me, Nancy, that is so troubling is that it's a president who's all about himself. Was he on the phone saying, hey, you've got to buy more soybeans or more wheat from our American farmers, or you got to buy cars that are made in America? I need you to do that. No, he was advocating for the only entity that he advocates for, which is himself.
That's so right. And the use of his properties and telling people where they had to stay is not talked about, but also the fact that we were all brought up to respect the office of president. And what I'm scared of is that our younger people are now listening, and they will not have the respect for the office. I don't ask them to have respect for the person, but we have to have respect for the office. And that we have three branches of the government. And the reason we have those is for the checks and balances. And this president can't be a dictator. That's not what America's about.
Amen. And within the executive branch of government, it is critically important, and I had a front row seat to this in the Obama administration as your labor secretary and in the Civil Rights Division. When you're making important decisions, it's really important to have a robust internal process where the president gets the benefit of advice from various stakeholders. This presidency is unhinged. He's his own staffer. He's his own war room right now. You look at what's happening with the situation in Syria and Turkey, and that is a function of the fact that a president, he took a call from the president of Turkey, who said, I want to invade. And this president said, be my guest, I'll move my troops out of the way, notwithstanding the fact that the people we were protecting were people who were fighting side by side with us in the effort to defeat ISIS. This action by the president, he has blood on his hands. And this is an action that's going to hurt our standing in the world, hurt our national security. There are ISIS fighters who are jailed in that northeast region of Syria who are in danger of getting released. And what did the president say? Well, make sure they just go to Europe.
Yeah.
Wow. It's breathtaking. And what I think we have to make sure voters understand is this is a president who's making our nation less safe. This is a president who always is putting himself first. What is the accomplishment they are most proud of on the Republican side? It's the tax cut bill. What does the tax cut bill have in common with the conversation we're having about Ukraine? Well, the tax cut bill was about helping the president and people like the president. And Ukraine and what he did there is about helping the president. It's all about himself. Democrats are the party of we. We're about helping other people. He's the party of me, Donald Trump. And
he doesn't realize there's no I in team. And
amen.
we have to be a team. And so when we're talking about that, we also have to move on and talk a little bit about how much great work that the DNC is doing to make sure that our nominees in 2020 can win. And so I would like you to brag a little bit about what you are doing with your data warehouse and all your early background organizations.
Sure. Well, thank you for the question. When I got to the DNC in 2017, we had a lot of work to do. We had to rebuild our infrastructure and, frankly, also rebuild the trust of voters. And when I talk about rebuilding infrastructure, I'm really talking about a number of things. We had to rebuild our data and technology infrastructure. It was antiquated. It was the equivalent of driving, a 2001 Ford Pinto, although those cars were probably gone by 2001 for good reason. But we were driving an old jalopy when I got here to the DNC, and we needed a modern a car that could move, a modern data infrastructure that could help us elect Democrats up and down the ticket. To give your listeners a sense of why this is so important, roughly 6,000 people who were running for office last year used our voter file. People in Connecticut running for state office, local office, your members of Congress, the governor's race, et cetera. They were using our data file, our voter file, and we work side by side with our state party partners. We have totally rebuilt our data and technology infrastructure so that, for instance, we bought up 110 million cell phone numbers. We gave hundreds of thousands to the Connecticut Democratic Party so you can connect more readily with voters. And where do voters consume their news? They consume their news on their smartphones. And so our data and technology investments have enabled us to help Democrats win. Our investments in organizing and early organizing. I think we got into the lazy habit of waiting until 2 months before an election before we started talking to people. I call that transactional politics. We're talking about relational politics. All politics is personal, Senator Kennedy always taught me, and we're building relationships. So this past summer in Milwaukee, for instance, we knocked on 20,000 doors. 25,000 doors in Detroit. 4 years ago, we hadn't knocked on basically any doors in those cities. And I bring those two cities up because they are in two states, Wisconsin and Michigan, that are indispensable to our electoral success next November. And our success there in 2018 was a function of the fact that we invested early and we invested everywhere and we worked closely with partners. So the data and technology, the organizing infrastructure, and our voter protection infrastructure. And what do I mean by that? We have to acknowledge and understand that the other side is going to try to lie, cheat, and steal. They want to try to make it harder for people to vote. As we speak right now in Ohio, the Republicans are trying to execute a wholesale, indiscriminate purge of voters. And the reason they're doing it is they got a green light from the Supreme Court, and the deciding vote were the Trump appointees to the court, who gave a green light to states to indiscriminately, in my judgment, purge voters who are eligible. That's inconsistent with who we are as a nation. But that's the reality of the world we live in. And so we're building a 12-month-a-year voter protection infrastructure so that we're working with local boards of elections to make sure there's election security. We're working to make sure voters are registered. We're working to make sure voters aren't purged. And if they're purged, we're calling them up to get them back on the rolls. All of these things, I think, are indispensable to our long-term success. So when I talk about infrastructure, that's what I'm talking about. And
you're doing a great job of it. You're even, I think, also training everyone from the first-time activists all the way up to the top-tier professionals in campaign work, and you're getting people out to run for office, which is exactly what we all need to do. And I thank you for doing this. So we know that the next debate is coming up on October 15th, which will be in Ohio, and then November 20th in Georgia. What do you think our candidates should be talking about in their next debate?
I think our candidates are going to be talking about our values, and I think there's a real alignment, Madam Chair, of our values. Every Democrat on that stage believes that everybody should have access to quality, affordable health care. We're about 80-90% of the way up the mountaintop, thanks to Barack Obama and Lyndon Johnson and Medicare and Medicaid and the Affordable Care Act. And we're going to have a conversation, and there are differences of opinion on how to get to the mountaintop, but there's no difference of opinion on the imperative of getting to that mountaintop, and there's no difference of opinion on the imperative of protecting people with pre-existing conditions, taking on the pharmaceutical industry. We're going to talk about all of those values. We're going to talk about the imperative of climate change and addressing it. And all the Democrats understand that this is an existential threat and that we need to take swift, bold action. The other side is still debating the science, which is just unimaginable to me. We're talking about how do we build an economy that works for everyone. Income inequality is at its worst levels now since they started collecting data in the 1960s. The gap between rich and poor is getting greater. Why? Because we've got an administration that has given a reckless tax break to people who don't deserve it, and all the while refuses to raise the minimum wage. It's not hard to figure out why the gap between the rich and everybody else is growing, and that's unconscionable. And so these are the types of things we're talking about. And of course, we'll end up talking about our democracy imperatives right now, because we've got a president who doesn't respect the rule of law. And there is, I think, a real consensus about the need to hold this president accountable.
And you're so right. As we go on, we will get down to one nominee. What do you think that we, as the parties in different states, and what you can do so that when the time comes, we are all united, again, for the candidate of our party?
Absolutely. I mean, I think that's a critically important question. I think our diversity is our greatest strength, and our unity is our greatest weapon in defeating Donald Trump. And if we want to govern again, we must first win. And what we have been doing throughout our Democratic primary process is ensuring through a host of efforts to make sure the process is transparent and fair. My goal is to make sure that everybody gets a fair shake, that they can swing the bat And, we've got 20, 25 people in the race. All but one aren't going to make it to the mountaintop. And my job is to ensure that all of their supporters are fully throated behind whoever that nominee is. And that's why, for instance, when we had the first two debates, we held them on separate nights. We did random selection so that there wasn't a kids table and an adults table. We created a grassroots fundraising threshold, so it wasn't just polling that could get you on the debate stage. If you weren't a known commodity, but you had developed a grassroots fundraising base, that was a way to get on the stage. That we've never done that before, and part of the reason we did that is we wanted to return power to the grassroots. And so that's been our North Star throughout. We want to make sure that everybody has a full and fair opportunity to make their case to the American people. I believe we've done that, and we've got more work to do. I'm looking forward to next week in Ohio and next month in Georgia, and this primary season and caucus season is right on our doorstep. And the key here is to make sure that we recognize that we must all be united, and we must never conflate unity and unanimity. I'm not asking anybody on listening to this podcast to agree with everything that our nominee might be articulating in their policy platforms. But what I am asking people to acknowledge is that every single candidate running for president is 1,000 times better than Donald Trump. And the values that we're fighting for, I believe, are the values that command the respect of the vast majority of the American people. What we have in common, to put it differently, far outweighs what our differences are. And we need everybody engaged, and everybody engaged every day.
You're so right. And, as you travel around the country, we're seeing in our state like a different kind of groups of people that are getting involved for the very first time. And they are really excited about that. We have local elections here in Connecticut right now, but they're also excited about ready for 2020. Have you seen that same kind of excitement all throughout the country? And is there a certain process that's working better than others?
Well, the excitement is everywhere. And one of the reasons I come to you today with optimism is because we really this is a dark moment in our democracy, but it's also I learned a long time ago that on the darkest nights you see the brightest stars, and there are so many people who stepped up and said, I'm not going to sit on the sidelines. We can't afford that. And you look at turnout in 2018, record turnout, the levels of which we haven't seen since the civil rights era of the 1960s. And so what we saw in 2018 isn't abating. What we saw in 2017 that helped us win races in Virginia, New Jersey, and then Alabama a month later isn't abating. This is indeed a movement. And what we need to do is to continue to organize early and organize everywhere. And people listening on this podcast, there are tremendous opportunities to organize and elect Democrats up and down the ballot in Connecticut. There are tremendous opportunities to do it elsewhere. I hope you'll stay engaged in Connecticut. And if you have relatives who live in Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Michigan, you might want to pay a visit on them and help them out as well.
Make sure they make the phone calls into the families and friends.
Amen. Exactly.
Because we need to get them out. As and the local and state Republicans here in Connecticut, we do see some of the candidates coming up that believe the Trump's rhetoric, and they're becoming with records of bigotry and homophobia and predicting violence and preaching services. But do you think Trump's impact has been on the local elections across the country?
Well, Donald Trump is a symptom. The racism that he spews and the invective that he spews, he's not the first person in American history to do it. But what is different about this president is using the bully pulpit of the presidency to create these false moral equivalencies. What do I mean by that? I mean, he didn't. The Charlottesville incident should have been a layup. There were some white supremacists who did unspeakable acts. And this wasn't a case of there are good people on both sides. No, that was a horrific act of bad people, period. No footnotes, no exceptions. That's what he should have done. It should come as a surprise to none of your listeners that hate crimes are on the rise. We just completed the Jewish high holidays, and across America, local law enforcement was on high alert near synagogues because of the fear of acts of anti-Semitic violence. And this president, when you spew the invective that you do, it should come as no surprise to anyone that people then act on it. And that is... that's what's different about this moment. Racism didn't start on January 20th, 2017. But when you have leaders whose modus operandi is to divide our communities, and that's just not who we are. And the party of Lincoln was once the party of civil rights, but the party of Lincoln is dead and buried. And we now have the party of Trump. And that's why we have this existential crisis of sorts in our democracy. And that's why folks have to get out there and vote and make sure we win in Connecticut, but also make sure that we win all over the country.
Absolutely. And, I hope that everybody will stay to their democratic values and not lean towards their fake news and their fears and spreading misinformation. As Democrats, we need to stand on a higher platform, I believe, than what we're seeing right now on the other side. So
yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think the best antidote to this president is truth. And there's an old adage. I heard the First Lady once say, when they go low, we go high. I have a variant on that. When they go low, we go vote. When they go lower, we get our friends to vote and everyone else who's eligible to vote. And when they go even lower, we vote at levels never seen before in this country, because that is the best antidote to the moment in time that we are in, is everybody getting out there and voting and sending a very clear message. And by the way, the world is watching us. This is a global virus of nativism. This isn't just a virus that is limited to the United States of America. And we've led before. We're going to lead now, and we're going to usher in a new era of shared responsibility and shared prosperity.
And I totally believe you're right. We are at the lowest level, so we will get everybody out to vote and win. So I end my podcast every time with asking the person that I'm speaking to talk about words that you live by. I've always said, while I've been involved, is my word is my bond. And so if you had to give us the words that you live by, what would they be?
Well, the words that I live by, I probably draw from my faith tradition. I was raised in a Catholic faith tradition, and there is scripture from Matthew 25, in which it is said, when I was hungry, you fed me. When I was naked, you clothed me. When I was an immigrant, you welcomed me. When I was incarcerated, you visit me. That we do unto the least of us, we do unto ourselves. And I think the most enduring symbol of our strength as a nation is Lady Liberty. And Lady Liberty, it doesn't say bring us your rich white European masses. It says bring us your tired, your huddled masses. And those masses who have come to America built America and made such remarkable contributions. And so when I think about the lessons that I live by, I think about that lesson that, frankly, my parents taught me and my faith teaches me. And it's not a teaching that's limited to my faith. It's a teaching that I see in every faith tradition and in my friends who don't come from a faith tradition. It's a universal value. And I think it's a value that's enshrined in the Democratic Party. And it's a value that at one point, actually, in our nation's history was also enshrined in the Republican Party, but it is now extinct. And so when I think about those children separated from their parents at the border, when I think about women with a pre-existing condition who now have a knot in their stomach again because they are looking at what this president's trying to do. When I look at the division that this president is sowing, that's just not who we are as a nation. And that's what motivates me every day, Madam Chair, to get out there and help elect Democrats, because we're better than this as a nation. And I think the Democratic Party can lead us to these better days.
And I think we will. And I thank you for your leadership, your guidance. You truly have tried to bring this party together, and we will, as a team, change this country back to where it should be with your leadership and a lot of work ahead of us. So, Mr. Chairman, thank you again for joining us today, and I can't be happier to have you as our national chairman.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you for your partnership.
Donkey Talk is available on iTunes, Google Play, and anywhere else you get your podcasts. If you liked it, remember to subscribe and visit ctdems.org to get involved.